This is episode 8 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Paul Menzer, professor of Shakespeare performance at Mary Bowen University and author of Anecdotal Shakespeare, A New Performance History. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
I couldn't stand studying in school. It made no sense to me. And then I got cast in a Shakespeare play as Ariel in The Tempest. So I thought, this is going to end really badly. I'm not going to enjoy this. And it transformed my life.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Hello, I am Cassidy Cash, and this week, our guest knows better than most that when you study William Shakespeare, you almost synonymously study 17th century theater. Ben Crystal is an actor, writer, producer, adventurer, and explorer of original practices in Shakespeare, and was the artistic director at Passion in Practice, an original practice-based theater company specializing in performances that rework the speech, rehearsal techniques, and performance methods of Shakespeare's theater. The co-writer of Shakespeare's Words and the Shakespeare Miscellany, with his father David Crystal, Ben's first solo book, Shakespeare on Toast, Getting a Taste for the Bard, was shortlisted for the 2010 Educational Writer of the Year Award. In 2011, he played Hamlet in the first original pronunciation production for 400 years as artist in residence with the Nevada Repertory Company. In 2012, he was the curator, producer, and creative director of the first CD of extracts of Shakespeare in original pronunciation for the British Library. Ben gives workshops and talks on performing Shakespeare around the world, and his 2017 TEDx talk was called Original Practices, Shakespeare's Craft. Ben, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So Shakespeare has obviously been performed successfully around the globe for centuries, but the concept of original practice productions is really kind of a young idea. In light of the past success of more traditional approaches, what drew you into original practice in the first place?
Yeah, he has been a bit successful, hasn't he? Although, no, not immediately. There was a good 100 years or so after theatre came back that people didn't like Shakespeare so much, and they turned all of his tragic endings into happy endings. And I suppose reinventing Shakespeare has been the mode for the last couple of 100 years since he became popular. Still not really, I hesitate to say trusting, but still not really letting Shakespeare be Shakespeare. As far as I understand it, the explorations in original practice of the last at least 50 years has been to pare back and perhaps rebalance the direction that many Shakespeare productions and companies go in to the way that they used to do it 400 years ago. The theatres that pare back so there's no setting or set or lights like the Globe or the Blackfriars in Stanton. The explorations in can we recreate an Elizabethan costume and what does that do to an actor's movement? Similar explorations in stage fighting. They're all, I think, attempts to not be authentic with Shakespeare, because who would actually want to feel like they're actually an Elizabethan standing in blood and mud and shit. And,
you can be too authentic.
And dying of the plague. It would be awful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is original practice, but why did you get into it though?
Oh no, sure. No, but so I may be getting a long way around to that, but I am getting to it. As far as I understand it, and this is the point as well, like original practices means many different things to many different people. As far as I understand what it means, it is an opportunity to not just explore how things used to be, but take the way that things used to be, reimagine them and reinvent them for the next generation of potential Shakespeare lovers and performers. So original practices is a pejorative term, said the new artistic director of the Globe recently. It means women can't act on the stage, and that ain't going to happen. Original practices did mean in Shakespeare's time that the women couldn't perform on the stage, but there's no way that Shakespeare was ever writing some of his great female parts for the day, not knowing that there'd be a day when women could act on the stage. So an original practice company, to some people, might mean all male. To some people, it might mean all men and young boys playing the female parts. To me, it means a cast and company made up of both genders, all ages, all ethnicities. The kind of company that Shakespeare would create today would be very, very different, I think, from the kind of company he, in some respects, had to create 400 years ago. In my idea of what original practices can be and offers, I see it as something that's very exciting and magical, and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of room for maneuver in that simplicity, in that sort of paring back, in that being inspired by the old. So all of those things really were what took me to that place, a deep love of Shakespeare, a deep desire to try and see what we could learn from these old ways in order to try and keep Shakespeare alive and getting people to come and see his works. Because I grew up hating Shakespeare, and I would hate for people to stumble down that rabbit hole themselves.
I am so surprised to hear that. You grew up hating Shakespeare?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't stand studying it in school. It made no sense to me. And then I got cast in a Shakespeare play as Ariel in The Tempest. And I thought, this is going to end really badly. I'm not going to enjoy this. And it transformed my life. Like learning the lines by heart rather than by mind to study, learning them by heart to speak and to share, and then performing them. Rehearsing them was kind of its own fascination, and indeed sparked off a different original practice exploration for me. But rehearsing them and then performing them in front of an audience, and having spent however long it was, I suppose we were rehearsing 2 nights a week for 6 weeks, maybe longer. And once you've rehearsed a comedy for more than a week or so, and you've all laughed at the jokes a few times, it very rapidly stops being funny.
Yes, that's true.
Shakespeare's plays weren't supposed to be rehearsed that long. They were never rehearsed that long. So
because they were doing different ones every night sometimes.
Exactly, yeah. So having been through that pain, and then the audience finally arriving, Shakespeare made sense to me in a way that it had never done and never could do in a book and on a page. And this was, the days before people like the English-speaking Union and their National Shakespeare Competition and the Shakespeare Schools Festival and Shakespeare Week over here, where the idea of learning and performing Shakespeare and potentially taking that performance somewhere else and showing other folk of your age, what you've been doing with Shakespeare, that didn't. If that existed when I was a boy, it wasn't readily available. And now these things are, of course. Yeah, it was a near miss. And fortunately, I found or met someone, a director that was passionate about Shakespeare and helped me on the path that I'm now on.
That's amazing. Well, okay, so you have acted, and the power of stage performance to bring Shakespeare's words to life in a way reading them can't, obviously. And you did explain to us that by original practices, there's a wide range. So my next question applies to your interpretation of original practice and the idea that when you are working as a director of a Shakespeare production and you want to follow original practice techniques to try, as you say, to reconnect with what Shakespeare would have done, how do the actors that show up to audition for you or who sign on to perform with you respond to this format? And what is their experience like when you say, we're going to do it like Shakespeare did it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that reading Shakespeare can give way to an awful lot of joy, but it's just harder to experience Shakespeare, I think, on the page for a lot of people than it is to see it or to speak it or to hear it. What is the experience like? It varies from absolute terror to absolute thrill, both inside myself and the actors I work with.
Sometimes at the same time, I guess.
Very, very often at exactly the same time. They are always experiments and explorations using these original practice methods and sort of reinterpreting them. And in fact, I could have helped some of the actors I've worked with by having a clearer understanding or a clearer route through how these techniques might help. But oftentimes you don't know whether they will be helpful or not until you're doing them. And because of the nature of them, which is essentially you don't have very much time, or you don't give yourself very much time, and you don't formally rehearse in the 20th century, so répétition, the French call rehearsal, repeating the scenes over and over again until they're perfect, and then, of course, spending a lot of energy pretending that it's the first time you've done it every time you're in front of an audience. Whereas the Elizabethan manner and method is that there's a very good chance you haven't heard what's being said before, or if you have heard what's being said before, you haven't heard it in that way, or the actors are improvising new blocking and making you respond in new ways, so that it's constantly, as the theatre director Mike Alfred said, different every night. So not having very much time, but also not having the entire play, not having the other people's words, only really focusing on your part, and leaving so much unplanned and to the four winds or to destiny or whatever you want to call it. It's exhilarating and terrifying again, all the way through. Actually, it's exhilarating, terrifying on stage in front of the audience, because that's really the only way you can learn how to do it too. So there's an awful lot of trust involved, and an awful lot of faith, an awful lot of holding on to the bar of a roller coaster kind of metaphors.
That's what I was thinking as you said that. You really have to trust the people you're on stage with.
Well, yeah. And boy, do you develop a great kinship and love of and for and with them. Like you would do any work colleague that you spend an awful lot of time with, being vulnerable and courageous with, and sharing that vulnerability and that courage in front of strangers, watching each other suddenly be surprisingly magnificent is one of the most nourishing and dearest things I've ever had the joy to witness in the actors that I've been lucky to work with.
It's exciting as someone who likes to go see Shakespeare plays. This method is thrilling because you can see, something like Romeo and Juliet, which I think I've seen more times than I can't even count how many times I've seen that play. But when you go and see it in this method, you've never seen it twice. Even, the same company, the same theater, you could go and see the same play and you would get something different.
Absolutely. I mean, there are anchors, as it were. The idea was they would have rehearsed the dances, they would have rehearsed the fights, they would have rehearsed any major crowd, multiple character, complicated bit sort of scenes. But outside of those, and maybe even to a degree, depending on the level of the amazing skills of Shakespeare's actors, even within those scenes, there would be a huge amount of opportunity for improvisation and change. Absolutely, yeah. It would be, and in our explorations and experiments with that over the last 3 years or so at the Wanamaker Playhouse at the Globe, and taking those productions on, each night was radically different. It almost as if the play were a diamond or a beautiful stone that you would turn and would refract and reflect the light differently every night.
That is a very nice way to put that. I did want to ask, one of the things I'm discovering as I write and put things out about Shakespeare is that there's a massive amount of opinion, very strong opinions over what's correct and what isn't. And I wanted to ask you if you get any kind of pushback or people that are skeptical of what you're doing, claiming that you can't really know what Shakespeare's original practices were.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. All the time. But
What do you say to them?
if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. And if it didn't cause a reaction, I mean, that's the point of theatre, isn't it, really? Is to make people think, reflect, react, emote, possibly go out and do it themselves even better, or never go again. But the other thing is that people are very territorial about Shakespeare. And so you're always going to ruffle some feather or other, whether it's by, setting Pericles on the moon, or by doing all female casts or all male casts, or speaking Shakespeare in an accent that makes people think of pirates rather than the sound that they prefer to hear Shakespeare in. Anything that helps, anything that opens Shakespeare up for you or for the people that come and see the Shakespeare that you want to do. Hopefully it won't be self-indulgent, but hopefully it will shed light in a way that someone hasn't done before. And then you're adding a rock to the pile. And that can only be a good thing, surely.
Sure. So earlier you mentioned a couple of the original practice, I don't know if conventions or methods, techniques, I guess would be the right word, of how it looks to perform under original practice conditions. The idea that rehearsals look different and there's improvisation happening on stage during a live performance. And but I wanted to ask you specifically about the cue script, because I think this deviates a lot from what people think of as theater. They think you get the script and you memorize it and then you go out on stage and you perform your lines. Do you use the cue script, and why do you think Shakespeare would have used them?
Sure. Well, this is a very, very different manner of creating a theatrical experience than, I don't know, let's say musicals, where there are tracks through. If you get a job on a musical, you will follow that track. It will be choreographed to within an inch of its life. And many, many, many hours and pounds or dollars, whatever, has been spent on making sure that every single note is perfect. And it's kind of the opposite, I think, of how Shakespeare started out, where it seemed there was continual and constant redraft of what they were doing long after the performances had started and finished. It's the idea, I suppose, that these texts are alive, that they're dynamic, workable things, that they are grubby and inky, and that you will get muddy by using them, that you will get bloody by using them, that you shouldn't be afraid to rip it all up and start over again, even when people have heard it already. The constant reinvention. And I think that part of the reason that they were so fluid with that, or perhaps not as precious with Shakespeare as we've become, is that each actor's part, each character was the property, as it were, of the actor. I'm sure they respected and very much were nourished advice Shakespeare might have been able to give them, but the clown looked after the clown's part, and the lead looked after his part, and they wouldn't have much opportunity to confer with each other, I suppose, about the state of them. And once you were in possession of that part, which basically meant the things that you said, the moments when you were to enter and exit, and the moments cueing you to say the things that you need to say. That's all the cue script is. Once it was yours, you could essentially do with it what you like. If you needed to change a cue, if you needed to cut something, then you go and speak to the actor that you would normally be cueing and tell him or her that it's changed. And, once the parts have been sort of divvied out, I think there's an idea that everything is locked in. But once the parts become the actor's own, then the fun can really start, I suppose. The focus that you gain from not being distracted by everyone else's words, but just by, enter when there is thunder and lightning, and say the words, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? And then you don't say anything else until you hear the words, upon the heath, or whatever it is. We've been exploring these cue scripts as tools in schools. And the wonderful thing is that the same thing that we saw in rehearsal happens with the younglings, in that They jump up on stage, they look each other in the eye, their heads aren't buried in a script. They start immediately walking around in a circle like witches, and very, very shortly they leave the stage again, and everyone's just witnessed an almost performance-ready telling of that scene. It makes you listen in a different way, and it makes you respond to the text in a very different way too. They're fascinating things, incredible tools, and I think we're only really at the beginning of understanding what they can do for us.
A lot less like viewing a moving painting and much more of an engagement with the audience, like you've just participated in a story.
Mm-hmm.
So explain the role of the stage in performing Shakespeare. So I know we think of Shakespeare, we think of the Globe and the open air theater and the daytime light and all of that, but I would have to think it's not always practical to perform only during the day or to, stage it where you've got daylight lighting the stage. So do you use electric lighting for original productions, and how much latitude do you give yourself when you're trying to stick to this?
I think latitude-wise, either actually or metaphorically, we look to the poster or the bust or the statue or the fridge magnet of Shakespeare's face in the corner of the room and say, "Hey, Bill, can we do this?" And 99 times out of 100, he goes, "Yeah, of course you can. Make the best 2 hours traffic of the stage." If it's a piece that you're cutting, I imagine he would. He's relinquished the copyright to the actors anyway, so he really, he had a degree of say as a shareholder back then, but still, he knew that his actors were the best sort of putters on of his work, and I imagine he would say, "Well, did you try and make it work?" And we would say, "Yes, Will, we did." And he said, "Did you really try though?" "Yeah, we did try quite hard." He said, "Well, do you need to try a couple more times? Because I like this bit and I wrote it and I think it's pretty good." And we'll go away with our heads hanging low, and then we'll come back and say, "Sorry, Will, we tried again and we really didn't work." He said, "Well, then cut it. It's obviously bad writing." Now, like, much as I'd love to be able to spend all of my waking theatrical life, even some of my sleeping theatrical life, in a building like the Globe or the Wanamaker or the Blackfriars or any of the great theatres that are original practice-esque, I don't know, the security keeps throwing me out. Like, they just won't let me.
You can't live here.
They won't let me sleep there. And frankly, like, original practice bathroom facilities can be awful.
Yes, true.
Not that any of these theatres have those, of course. At least not that I've found.
No, I think they modernized a few key things.
They've done some modernizations, exactly.
Yeah.
So what choice is there then? There is the choice to take Shakespeare outside, and we've looked at that. And there's the choice to take Shakespeare inside into a studio sort of theatre and have much more control over, as you say, the qualities of light and that kind of thing. Or we can find and discover what a new original practice space is to a group of modern Shakespeare makers, whether that is a sort of super new type theatre built inside an old building like the Royal Exchange in Manchester, or whether it's the sort of building that the Irondale Ensemble have, or whether it's the sort of multi-use, make it any shape you like sort of theatre that the Wiley has down in Dallas. I try to think about the sort of things that I imagine Shakespeare was looking for in a space, and, stepping into any of the original practice spaces that I've mentioned, the Globe or whatever. It is a space that makes you look up. It is a space that has contact with the natural elements, with nature. It is a space that soars and inspires, and it is a space that brings the audience together with the performers, with the artist, into a mutual territory, I suppose. So trying to pluck those strings in whatever space I might be sort of looking at doing Shakespeare in is the most important thing. And having given myself so much latitude in that respect, we've found ourselves performing Shakespeare in some truly magnificent spaces, including spaces that were built for music rather than for voice, and found our way through a negotiation of how to make the plays sing. And every time, again, you accept a new and different kind of space, and you learn something new.
Well, speaking of singing and sound, I think it's fair to say that you are quite well known specifically for original pronunciation, and I would be remiss if we didn't include that in our discussion of Shakespeare and performance. Can you share with us a little bit what the term means, original pronunciation, and then when you perform your Shakespeare productions, are you using this in all of the productions, and how does an audience unfamiliar with that receive the hearing of original pronunciation?
Sure. The Globe Theatres are an original practice space. It's a reconstruction of the theatre of how they imagine it might have been. There have been explorations in original practice costume and stage fight and movement and accent. And original pronunciation was the name given to the explorations of the original practice of accent. So that's what it means. It is the reconstruction of the sounds of Shakespeare's actors over a 20-year period. It's about 80 to 90% right, which isn't that bad for 400 years. The accent hasn't changed that much, but there are enough changes between the way that Shakespeare and his actors spoke and the way that we now speak. By we, I mean the speakers of modern American or British or Antipodean or whatever English is around the world. And a lot of those changes have had a knock-on effect to whether or not rhymes that Shakespeare wrote still rhyme, or puns that he wrote into the language still work. But also the placement of the vowels in Shakespeare's theatre, in the sounds that his actors make, were further back in the throat, in the mouth, and further down in the mouth. And that has a very interesting knock-on effect in that it shifts your center when you speak, the center, the place that you're speaking from. It moves that center down towards your gut and in a very similar place to where you might be giving diaphragmatic support if you've learned how to breathe and project in that way. It tends to make actors much more earthy, and the bulk of the sounds that have changed are not the consonants, but the vowels. And they say that the consonants carry the meaning, but the vowels carry the emotion. So all of these things combined tend to bring about a much sort of earthier, faster, and more emotionally locked in performance. Plus, also with all the rhymes and everything else, it's a little like hearing the play in tune. It's certainly the tune or the harmonic, if you will, that the plays were written for, in the same way as the Globe Theatre is the theatrical space harmonic that a lot of the plays were written for. Most audiences love it. Most actors that I work with love performing in it. I enjoy performing in it too, but I don't perform in it all the time. Audiences tend to, their first response is usually, well, they speak like that where I come from. They sense a familiarity in it, and that's because English left England and went all over the world and carried its vowel sounds with it, and not all of them have changed. So there are flecks of most modern speakers of English, most of their accents in Shakespeare's accent. Actually, the first response from a lot of people is a little bit more of an arms folded, I'm not going to understand it, and therefore maybe I won't go, or I'll go and I know I won't like it.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well, hey, it comes back to what you said earlier about the things that ruffle people's feathers with Shakespeare. And a lot of our generation, and the generation coming up now, and my parents' generation, and my grand's generation too, and beyond, are used to hearing Shakespeare in a very, very different and particular sort of sound.
It's a little bit of that. These young whippersnappers and their crazy pronunciation.
I was reading an interview with Barry Rutter, who said the Northern Broadside Shakespeare Company 25 years ago in England. It's just lost its funding, having done 25 years of amazing, amazing work. And their work started out with, let's hear Shakespeare in a Northern English accent, which 25 years ago, like, never mind ruffling people's feathers, people are outraged. that people weren't changing their accent to sound as they thought it more Shakespearean, but that good Shakespeare sound that has somehow passed itself around the world. And so there's a good Shakespeare sound in American English and a good Shakespeare sound in Australian English and New Zealand English and African English is so vastly different from the way that Shakespeare spoke. And we are finding a joy, I suppose, because the familiarity that the audience hears is mirrored in the familiarity that the actors feel, because they're all learning an accent now that, when I had to learn Shakespeare, I had to learn received pronunciation when I was a younger actor.
Well, that's what they tell you, yeah.
Yeah, well, and some of the vowel sounds of received pronunciation are in my voice, but they're not in very many people's voices. And so most people have to make a really big jump to get to proper Shakespeare. But with this original pronunciation, they make less of a jump. So if you and I and a bunch of other people learned original pronunciation, we'd all learn 80 to 90% right of original pronunciation. There is no thing as absolutely perfect. It can't be. Again, we're not looking for authenticity, nor would we want it to be. But then we fill in that last 10 to 20% with our regular speaking voice, our natural sounds, our accent, our identities. So we'll sound the same, but we'll still sound individual. Now, compare that to we all remove our modern accents and our regional variations and all learn received pronunciation. Well, we'll sound the same, but we'll no longer have any ownership over that sound, really. And so you've got an audience coming to hear a show in original pronunciation that thinks it's familiar, a bunch of actors that are able to use and keep some of their own voice. Yeah, for the most part, audiences and actors and folk who are involved in this particular original practice experiment have had a lot of fun doing it and had a lot of enjoyment from it. And the hope is that it will not pave the way for future original pronunciation productions forevermore. That would be a shame. I think that it will pave the way. I hope that it will pave the way to a place where anybody can speak Shakespeare because they want to. And the right voice and the right sound for Shakespeare is yours because you want to.
So I wonder if you can settle a mystery for us.
Okay.
Original practice, when I'm reading about it, says that specific attention is given to the silent stage directions of Shakespeare's writing of the play. So I wonder if you can tell us, how does George Plantagenet die in Richard III? The stage directions indicate that there's a butt of Malmsey in the next room, as well as say that they exit with the body, but there's no specific reference in the text itself to say how he dies. So as someone who has acted and directed in original practice, if you were staging Richard III, how is George going to die? By drowning or something else?
All right, that's a good question. I think the murderer's plan was to drown him, and then he wakes up. And then he defends himself. And in some productions, he grabs one of the murderer's daggers and attacks them. And in other productions, he wants to do that, but they trip him up, or I think I've seen a production as well where he goes to attack them, trips, falls, and kills himself. And yet there are others when there's a massive fight and they strangle him or they do end up drowning him. But yeah, Shakespeare is curiously, bafflingly at times, vague and non-specific about how people meet their end. I was talking about this the other day on a show about fight and stage fight in particular, and stage fight in Shakespeare. If you think about the big fights between Edmund and Edgar, or Mercutio and Tybalt, he doesn't really tell us. How do you do it? You get three really great actors in a room and have them learn the scene and play it, and get them to tell you about what type of people they think these characters are and what type of actions they may take to defend themselves or in attacking. What sort of murderer are you? What sort of man are you? George Clarence, evidently a very articulate and emotional one.
But it goes back to kind of what you're saying earlier of how when you do perform things under original practice conditions, it is different every time. And this is one of maybe the
Yeah,
cases
well, I mean, but with stage fight, it's different. So you can't. I don't think. Heaven knows if Shakespeare's actors were skilled enough to be able to improvise stage fight. They certainly didn't have the health and safety laws that we do, and doing fights pretty much every day, being able to make up a new one, whispering to each other, "Oh, let's do the end of Mercutio and Tybalt's fight and the beginning of Edmure and Edgar's, and we've suddenly got ourselves a new fight." Assuming that one isn't using rapier and one isn't using broadsword. But we do not, as modern practitioners, the idea of improvising something as potentially dangerous as a stage fight is anathema. It's horror would fill most people's eyes, and rightly so, because we don't want anyone getting hurt. So I would be keen to hear from them about their instincts on the scene, and we'd look into the text to see if anything gave us any small clues. You talk about these silent stage directions. Perhaps there are indications of character in the way that the three articulate themselves that would give us a moment of inspiration. But there are other greater and better silent stage directions that Shakespeare gives us. But these opportunities, that moments like an unexplained fight and an ensuing death, they're really exciting. And one of my stage director friend of mine always used to say, the seed of the fight is planted well before the fight actually starts. So we'd look as far back as we possibly could, and then we'd dive in and play, and then hopefully build something safe and dramatic and awful and terrifying from that play.
So no real resolution to George's death. I suppose we'll have to go and see the play performed to discover.
Well, I think that's the point, that there isn't a specific answer, because Shakespeare's left it open for people to make their own answer. But I've certainly seen a half a dozen brilliant different ones that can answer the mystery.
That do it justice, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I have a few additional questions I want to ask you, not directly related to Shakespeare, but before I get to those, is there anything you would want to tell us or that you would want us to know?
Try it. No, I mean, if there's anyone out there, there was a panel about original practices last month in Ohio, original practices for modern makers. And I think that there's a lot of ideas about what it should be or what it must be, that you must have a beautiful, big, expensive building and beautiful, expensive costumes, and women aren't allowed, and we can't know each other's lines, and all of these things. And you don't need a big building. You don't need expensive costumes or any costumes. You don't need any set. You need a bunch of people that you love working with and spending time with, and a great text, and maybe a crown, and maybe a sword. And you do it in a space that you adore, and you speak it in your own voices. And that's original practices. So anyone can try it. So I would say try it.
Oh, get
you might like it.
Mm-hmm. So think back over the last year or two. What are one or two books that you've read that have had the biggest impact on you?
Winter's Tale and Richard II.
Good choices.
Thank you. Every now and again I get to read a fiction book. Not quite as often as I would like, I get to read non-fiction Shakespeare books. There's a number of non-fiction Shakespeare books that a very dear friend has read and we have talked about, but the last year I've been acting and playing in Winter's Tale and Richard II, and generally when I'm acting I don't read anything else. I'm a bit of a Shakespeare geek, but I'm a Shakespeare geek insofar as outside of reading the actual plays, I don't tend to stray very far further. I should do more. What was the last great Shakespeare book I read? I love reading James Shapiro's stuff.
Yes.
Got really fresh.
His stuff is dense. His books.
It is, but, well, I don't know. Like, I thought Contested Will was really, and 1599 and 1606, I think they're really accessible for an awful lot of people, especially compared to an awful lot of work by Shakespeare Academia. It can be a lot more dense.
Those are good. Those are good ones. So you said to get involved, and I think we're definitely interested to give that a go from how you've described it. But what is your best advice for someone that says, yeah, okay, I want to get involved in original practice? How do they do that?
Well, like I just said, get a group of people together that you like working with, find a space. It can be a barn or an outdoor space or whatever you like. And to make some immediate decisions about, are you going to use cue scripts? You don't have to do every original practice, right? You can pick and choose. It is such an unknown thing that it is in some degrees a buffet that you can pick from as you like.
So just act.
And then learn them by heart and try and do it as quickly as you can for as little money as you can. And a friend would say, the greatest original practice of them all is that Shakespeare was operating in a business. So try and make some money too and keep doing it. The greatest original practice of them all, really. Keep doing it as long as you can. But yeah, original practice is the cheapest and quickest and most easiest sort of Shakespeare gig for people to be able to commit themselves to, because in theory you can start on Friday and be done by Sunday night.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So, well, what's next for you? What are you working on that you're most excited about?
I'm super excited about coming back to America in April. Well, this will be out by then, I suppose, but I'll have been back to America. I love coming to work in America, both on the West and East Coast this time. I've been back to the West Coast for a while. And then I'm going back to Japan to work with a theatre company out there. Then hopefully Prague, and then to run some workshops in Australia. So carrying on writing and acting and workshopping and generally spreading the word of the bard as best as I can.
Well, Ben, Crystal, we have enjoyed talking with you today and taking this look inside Shakespeare's theater and learning about original practice. We will definitely keep an eye out on the things that you do moving forward and appreciate your time today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.